Mara Sullivan caught the clear four-chamber between both hands without twisting, opening, or disconnecting a thing. Stop the infusion. The order cracked across Mercy Harbor's private suite so sharply that the monitor's steady beeping seemed to hesitate. Dr. Helen Park turned from the foot of the bed. Two residents stared. A security guard hand moved beneath his jacket. On the bed, Adrian Vescari opened his dark eyes. 12 physicians had examined him across 2 shifts. Cardiology, internal medicine, toxicology consults, every expensive layer of attention a man like him could command. None of them had questioned the line feeding his vein. Mara was the maid, the broad, plus-size woman in the black and white household uniform who changed linen, arranged personal belongings, and knew better than to stand between doctors and their machines. "Step away from the equipment," one of the residents said. Mara did not. She kept her hands on the rigid outer housing, well below the sterile connection, and stared at the tiny dark flecks suspended inside the chamber. They shifted when the fluid moved. Not bubbles, not a reflection, something physical, something that had not been there when she had straightened the room 20 minutes earlier. "I'm not touching the connection," she said. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "I don't know what that is, but the seal is sitting wrong, and those particles should not be inside a clear line." The resident gave a disbelieving laugh. "Your housekeeping, household staff," Mara corrected. "And I spent 4 years inspecting sealed medical packaging before the plant closed." Dr. Park's expression changed by less than an inch, but Mara saw it. Attention replacing irritation. "How certain are you?" "Certain enough that I'd rather be fired than watch you throw that away." The room went silent. Adrian Vescari controlled shipping contracts, union votes, private security, and half the fear that moved through Baltimore's docks after midnight. Men lowered their voices when they said his name. Yet now he lay pale against white linen, one arm taped to a line that might be killing him, and the only person willing to interrupt 12 doctors was a maid he had barely looked at before today. His gaze fixed on Mara. Let her finish. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Dr. Park moved at once. "Stop the pump," she ordered. A nurse silenced the infusion. Another prepared a clean replacement under protocol. Mara released the chamber and stepped back before anyone could accuse her of crossing further into clinical territory. Her palms were damp. Her heart hammered hard enough to hurt. She remembered another room years earlier, another supervisor telling her not to create problems when she had found a broken seal. She remembered signing nothing, losing everything, and being called difficult for refusing to lie. Not again. Dr. Park examined the chamber beneath the white light. Document the time. Photograph the assembly before removal. Seal the entire component. The resident who had laughed no longer looked amused. Adrian's security director, Caleb Ross, started toward the door. "Lock the floor." "No," Dr. Park said. "Not until the evidence transfer is documented." Caleb's jaw tightened. Adrian watched the clash between medical authority and armed power, then looked back at Mara. "What else did you notice?" She forced herself to answer only what she knew. "The tamper ring is slightly raised. The lot label is darker than the other supplies I've seen in this room. And someone moved the bedside tray while I was gone." "Ooh, I don't know." The words cost her, but she would not pretend certainty to impress him. "Then we find out," Adrian said. The replacement line went in under Dr. Park's supervision. The used component was sealed, marked, and carried away through a documented chain. 43 minutes later, Dr. Park returned with a preliminary toxicology result and a face stripped of all professional distance. "The contaminant is toxic," she said. It was entering through the 4 assembly. No one looked at Mara as furniture now. The resident lowered his eyes. The nurse stopped breathing for a second. Even Caleb's hard expression shifted. Adrian turned his head on the pillow and studied the maid who had seen what 12 doctors had missed. Mara should have felt triumphant. Instead, she remembered the bedside tray, the altered label, and the false service request that had pulled her out of the room. The poison had been found. The more dangerous question was when someone had put it there and why they had needed the maid gone first. By noon, Mara's black and white uniform felt less like clothing than evidence. Every doctor, security officer, and hospital administrator who passed the private suite looked at her differently now. Some with respect, some with suspicion, and some with the cold calculation reserved for people who had become inconvenient. Dr. Park had moved the investigation into a small conference room behind the nurse's station. The sealed-for component was already gone to the independent lab, but Mara's memory remained in the room with them. "Start from the last time you saw the line, looking normal," Dr. Park said. Mara opened the slim, housekeeping notebook she carried on every shift. The pages held linen counts, delivery times, damaged items, and task initials in neat black ink. It was the kind of record no one noticed until something went wrong. 8:42, she said. I changed the pillowcases and wiped the outer tray. The chamber was clear. At 8:51, I received a service request telling me to bring fresh towels to the family lounge. Naomi Price, the household operations manager, leaned closer. There was no towel request on my schedule. I know. Mara tapped the entry. That's why I wrote the time. Caleb Ross stood near the door, broad shoulders rigid beneath his dark suit. Who gave the order? A man in a gray hospital jacket. He said Naomi had sent him. Description. Average height. Hospital badge, turned backward. I didn't see his name. Caleb's expression hardened. You left Adrian alone? Mara looked directly at him. I left him with 2 nurses, a resident, and your guard outside the door. The accusation still stung. So did the truth beneath it. Someone had used her obedience to create an opening. Dr. Park drew a line across a printed timeline. You were gone 7 minutes. 6 minutes and 40 seconds, Mara corrected. The elevator took longer coming back. Adrian sat at the far end of the room in a wheelchair, pale but alert, a blanket over his legs and anger held behind absolute stillness. Lock the floor, Caleb said. Move Miss Sullivan to the Vescary estate until we know who had access. Mara's spine stiffened. No, every face turned toward her. Caleb looked almost offended. This is not a negotiation. It is if you're talking about where I sleep and whether I'm allowed to leave. Adrian's eyes narrowed, not at her refusal, but at Caleb. Let her speak. Mara closed the notebook. I will accept protection under conditions. I keep my phone. I choose my own attorney. I can leave whenever I want. No one searches my things without permission. And I'm not being moved into your house. Caleb gave a humorless breath. You are a witness in an attempted murder. I'm still a person. Silence settled over the room. Mara had expected Adrian to crush the boundary simply because he could. Instead, he looked at Caleb and said, arrange a secure hotel under her name, not ours. 2 guards outside, none inside. Her attorney gets access before anyone questions her again. Caleb hesitated. Sir, those are her terms. Adrian turned to Mara. Unless you have others. The question mattered more than she wanted it to. Not yet. Then not yet. It was the first time Mara understood that restraint could be a form of power. Dr. Park returned to the timeline. The service request created the only unaccounted interval before you found the altered line. Naomi nodded slowly, and whoever sent it knew Mara would respond without making a scene. Mara looked down at the exact time written in her notebook. For years, people had mistaken her quietness for compliance. Someone had built a murder attempt around that mistake. Now the hospital wanted a formal statement, and the first draft waiting outside described her as a maid who had interfered with medical equipment. The statement waiting outside the conference room reduced Mara's warning to 3 bloodless lines. Household employee made unauthorized contact with clinical equipment. Possible contamination observed after interference. Infusion discontinued as a precaution. Mara read it twice while the hospital's risk management director watched her over a silver pen. This is inaccurate, she said. The woman folded her hands. It is preliminary language. It says the contamination was observed after I interfered. I never opened, disconnected, or adjusted the line. You handle the housing. I stopped it from being thrown away. The director slid the pen closer. Ms. Sullivan, the hospital is trying to protect everyone involved. Mara looked through the glass wall at Adrian's guarded suite. 12 physicians had reviewed him. A toxic substance had entered his bloodstream. Yet the institution's first instinct was to make the maid's hands look more dangerous than the poison. Protect them from what? She asked. From admitting I was right? Naomi Price sat beside her, pale and rigid. Mara, perhaps counsel should revise the wording. Counsel can revise it after the facts stay in. Mara placed one finger beneath each sentence. It must say the infusion was active when I saw the particles. It must say the tamper ring was raised and the lot label was darker than the matching supplies. It must say Dr. Park confirmed the concern and ordered the line removed. The risk director's expression cooled. You're not qualified to characterize medical equipment. I'm qualified to describe what I saw. And if your actions contributed to the condition of the component, the old factory office returned in a flash. The supervisor asking her to approve a shipment with broken seals, the accusation that followed when she refused, the unemployment notice folded inside a plain white envelope. Mara felt the same pressure now. Sign the easier story, keep the powerful people comfortable, and carry the blame quietly. She pushed the pen back. I won't sign this. The door opened. Adrian entered in his wheelchair with Caleb behind him. He still looked drained, but the room seemed to contract around him. What happens if she refuses? He asked. The director straightened. Her access to the floor will be suspended pending review. The household agency may also reconsider her placement. Adrian's gaze sharpened. You are threatening the witness who stopped the infusion. I'm describing procedure. Mara turned toward him before his anger could become a weapon. Don't threaten them for me. Caleb looked at her as if she had stepped in front of a blade. Adrian did not. What do you want? He asked. The record to be true. His jaw tightened, but he nodded once. Then let it be true. He offered legal counsel and temporary housing expenses. Mara accepted the attorney and nothing else yet. By evening, her badge had been deactivated, her placement suspended, and the room assigned to her at the Vescary estate listed as unavailable until further notice. Naomi found her in the service corridor with a cardboard box containing 2 uniforms and her notebook. I'm sorry, Naomi whispered. You should not be the one paying for this. Mara looked down at the revised statement in her hand. Her wording remained. So did the lot number. Minutes later, Dr. Park called. The label detail had matched unopened stock in the private suite inventory. She was ordering the entire lot quarantined. Mara had lost her shift, her room, and perhaps her livelihood. But the sentence they had wanted erased had just led them to another sealed 4-component, and this one had never touched Adrian's bedside. By 9 the next morning, the unopened 4-component sat beneath white lights in Mercy Harbor's restricted review room, sealed inside its original packaging. Mara watched through the glass with Dr. Park, Adrian, and 2 members of the incident team. She was no longer wearing her maid uniform. Her access badge had been canceled, her room at the estate taken away, and the navy sweater Naomi had lent her still smelled faintly of laundry soap. Yet the hospital had called her back because the lot number in the statement she refused to change matched the component now being examined. No one opens it outside protocol, Dr. Park said, and Ms. Sullivan does not handle it. Mara nodded. I don't need to. A quality officer photographed the seal, documented the number, and transferred the component for independent testing. The waiting was worse than the discovery. Mara stood with her arms folded, listening to machines behind the walls, and trying not to imagine the hospital deciding the first result had been an accident. Adrian sat in a wheelchair near the window, pale beneath a black shirt, one hand resting motionless on the armrest. He had said almost nothing since arriving, but every person who entered the room noticed him before they spoke. 40 minutes later, Dr. Park returned holding a printed preliminary report. Her face answered the question before her voice did. The unopened component contains the same toxic contaminant signature. The room went still. Mara felt no triumph, only cold spreading through her chest. So, it was already inside the supply, she said, before it reached his bed. That is now the leading conclusion, Dr. Park replied. The used line and this sealed unit are separate pieces of evidence. We will not treat them as interchangeable. Adrian's gaze moved from the report to Mara. 12 doctors, he said quietly. How did 12 doctors miss it? Dr. Park did not defend herself with anger. Because none of us were looking at the same problem. She placed the report on the table. Cardiology saw rhythm changes. Internal medicine saw inflammation. Toxicology reviewed symptoms and blood work. Nursing reviewed medication orders and infusion rates. Each specialty examined the part assigned to it. The inline component had already passed through supply handling and setup, so it was treated as neutral equipment rather than a possible source. One of the physicians lowered his eyes. Dr. Park continued, "That does not excuse the miss. It explains the system that allowed it." Mara looked at the sealed evidence. "I noticed it because rooms on my job, things that move, labels that change, seals that sit wrong, and because you inspected sterile packaging before this work, Dr. Park said. "We verified your employment history." Mara's stomach tightened. She knew what came next. The old disciplinary file lay on the table beside the test result. The report that called her argumentative, difficult, uncooperative. Adrian saw the words and felt a slow, controlled fury rise beneath his ribs. Someone had punished her once for refusing to approve damaged seals. Now another institution had suspended her for refusing to rewrite the truth. He could destroy careers with a phone call. But Mara had already taught him that force could contaminate the very thing he wanted protected. So he waited. Dr. Park looked directly at Mara. "The investigation needs a formal witness. Your background is relevant, but so is the record attached to it. If you agree, both become reviewable." Mara stared at the file that had followed her for years. Becoming a witness meant the worst thing ever written about her could be repeated by people who had never met her. Refusing meant giving the hospital one more reason to treat her discovery as a lucky interruption. "Use the whole record," she said, "including the part where I refused to sign off on broken seals." Dr. Park nodded. "Then you are formally entered as the originating witness." Adrian's eyes remained on Mara, and for the first time, there was something warmer than calculation in them, respect sharpened by the knowledge of what her choice had cost. Before anyone could speak again, the hospital administrator's phone rang. She answered, listened, and went pale. HarborMed Sterile Logistics has announced an emergency recall of the entire lot. "That's fast," Mara said. "Too fast," Dr. Park replied. The administrator looked toward the glass doors. "Their regional director is already on his way. He says he personally authorized the recovery." Graham Pike entered Mercy Harbor wearing a charcoal suit, a silver HarborMed pin, and the calm expression of a man who expected institutions to move aside for him. Two corporate attorneys followed with sealed folders. "This appears to be an isolated manufacturing defect," he said before sitting down. HarborMed has already initiated a voluntary recall to protect patients. Mara stood beside Dr. Park at the review table. Adrian remained in his wheelchair near the glass wall, silent and watchful. "You announced the recall less than an hour after the second result," Mara said. Pike looked at her badge-free sweater, then at the file in front of him. "And you are the household employee who handled the used component. I prevented it from being discarded. According to Mercy Harbor's initial report, you interfered with clinical equipment. According to the corrected report, the infusion was active when I identified a raised tamper ring, altered label, and visible particulate." Pike's smile thinned. He opened another folder. "Your confidence is interesting, considering your history." Mara recognized the old factory letter before he turned it toward the room. Argumentative, uncooperative, refused supervisory direction. The words had once cost her a career. Now he displayed them as if they explain away poison. "You were dismissed from a medical packaging facility after a dispute over quality procedures," Pike said. "Isn't that correct? I refuse to approve damaged seals. Your former employer characterized the matter differently." Naomi Price rose from the far end of the table. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. The complete employment record states that Mara documented compromised packaging and declined to certify it. The disciplinary language came after her refusal. Pike glanced at Naomi as though household managers were not supposed to interrupt men like him. "This is not a trial." "Then stop presenting half a file like a verdict," Mara said. A hospital administrator cleared her throat. "Ms. Sullivan, pending the contractor review, the Vescary household has ended your active placement." Staff housing is no longer available. The sentence landed harder than Mara expected. 2 uniforms in a cardboard box. 1 borrowed sweater. No room waiting for her when she left the hospital. Pike leaned back. Harbor Med is willing to discuss compensation once the recall is complete, provided all parties avoid unsupported allegations. You mean provided I withdraw my statement? I mean provided you recognize the limits of your expertise. Mara looked at the sealed evidence behind a glass. My expertise was enough to stop the poison. My statement stays. Adrian's hand tightened on the wheelchair arm. Ms. Sullivan will have independent counsel, he said, and housing of her choice outside my estate, with no obligation attached. Mara met his eyes. He was offering protection, not a cage. Counsel, she said. A hotel for 3 nights. I decide after that. Done. Pike closed the folder. Our recall team will collect every Harbor Med unit on this floor before midnight. As his attorneys began distributing paperwork, Mara saw the route printed on the collection schedule. Service elevators C, family lounge corridor, private suite access. The same path used by the false towel request that had pulled her from Adrian's room. She placed one finger on the page. This collection route, she said. Who authorized it? Pike's expression remained smooth, but his eyes changed. Standard procedure. Mara remembered the backward badge, the empty lounge, and 6 minutes 40 seconds missing from the room. She no longer had a job or a place to live, but she still had the timestamps. Then the standard procedure should appear in 3 different logs, she said. And if those times don't match, your recall team isn't coming for defective supplies. It's coming for evidence. The 3 records arrived from 3 different authorities and refused to tell the same story. Naomi Price brought the household task roster, printed from the agency system and signed before Adrian had ever been poisoned. Mercy Harbor's administrator supplied the service elevator access log under formal incident review. Caleb Ross placed his private visitor record on the table last, then folded his arms as if the paper had insulted him personally. Mara sat between them with her notebook open. She had no hospital password, no security terminal, and no authority to order anyone into cooperation. She only had the time she had written down before anyone knew it would matter. 8:51, she said. That is when the false towel request reached me. Naomi pointed to her roster. No task was assigned. Mara should have remained in the suite. 8:53, Mara continued. The hospital administrator ran a finger down the elevator log. Service elevator C opened on the private floor. Caleb checked his record. No scheduled vendor delivery. There was a visitor credential, Mara said. Find the one active between 8:52 and 8:58. The administrator hesitated. These logs contain protected information. Adrian sat at the end of the review table, still pale, one hand resting on the arm of his wheelchair. Then release only what the inquiry is authorized to see. His voice was quiet. No more. Mara looked at him. He could have demanded the entire system. Instead, he had limited himself before anyone else needed to. The administrator entered the approved filter and read the result. Temporary contractor badge, HM74. Naomi checked the household roster again. No contractor was expected. Caleb's expression hardened. Harbor Med credential. The room fell silent. Mara drew 3 short lines in her notebook. False request. Elevator entry. Unscheduled credential. The badge entered the floor 2 minutes after I left Adrian's room, she said. It exited less than a minute before I came back. Dr. Park leaned forward. That establishes access. It does not establish what a person did. I know. Mara refused the relief, trying to rise inside her. Being careful had saved her once. It had also cost her nearly everything. It could still be a clerical error, a shared credential, or an unauthorized delivery that had nothing to do with the 4. But the times matched the only window when the component could have changed. Caleb looked at Adrian. Give me the badge owner. I'll have an answer before lunch. No, Mara said. Caleb turned sharply. We finally have a name attached to a door. We have a credential attached to a door. If you frighten the wrong person, everyone above him will erase the trail. Adrian's gaze stayed on Mara. What do you need? a lawful link between HarborMed's access and a reason to target you. For the first time, something changed in his face, not surprise, but recognition. He knew where such a reason might exist. My port records, he said. Caleb's jaw tightened. Those files expose Vescary routes, contractors, and oversight failures. Yes, Adrian replied. Mara understood the cost immediately. The records that could prove motive might also show that Pike's network had moved through Adrian's own empire. Outside the review room, HarborMed's recall team was already on the road to Mercy Harbor. Inside, Adrian possessed the next piece of proof. Opening it could destroy Pike's cover. It could also open Adrian's world to everyone watching. The settlement arrived in a cream envelope with Mara's name embossed in black. HarborMed would restore her employment placement through a different household agency, pay 6 months of housing, cover legal fees, and issue a statement praising her good faith concern. In return, she would withdraw the language describing deliberate substitution, acknowledge the possibility of manufacturing error, and agree not to speak publicly while the recall proceeded. Mara read the final clause twice. "They'll give me my life back," she said. Her attorney sat beside her in Mercy Harbor's council room. Dr. Park stood near the window. Adrian occupied the far end of the table, still pale, one hand curled around a glass of water. "They'll give you a quieter version of it," the attorney replied, "one where their wording becomes the official record." Mara looked at the signature line. A week ago, stable housing and restored work would have felt like rescue. Now the offer looked like another sealed package with something wrong beneath the surface. "What happens to the statement I already gave?" "It remains in the file," the attorney said, "but the settlement would let HarborMed characterize your conclusions as unsupported. And the fact that I found the poison, they would describe it as an accidental observation." Mara pushed the envelope away. "No," Dr. Park exhaled slowly. "Once you refuse, they may attack your record publicly. They already did. This time it will be under oath and in front of regulators." Mara thought of the factory office, the canceled badge, the cardboard box of uniforms. Every institution that wanted her silent had offered the same bargain in different language. Comfort in exchange for surrendering the truth. "Then let them attack the whole record," she said. Her attorney placed the sworn statement before her. It named the active infusion, the altered seal, the lot discrepancy, the false service request, the matching unopened component, and the HarborMed credential recorded during the substitution window. Mara signed her full name at the bottom. The scratch of the pen sounded louder than it should have. "Once this is filed," the attorney warned, "you cannot return to anonymity." Mara capped the pen. "I already lost the anonymous life." Across the table, Adrian watched her choose the dangerous path without asking him to clear it. Then his counsel opened a locked case and removed a stack of Vescary maritime manifests. Caleb shifted near the door. "Those records expose our subcontractors, inspection failures, and port blind spots," he said. "They may expose more than Pike." Adrian's gaze remained on Mara's signature. For years, he had protected his empire by controlling what others were allowed to see. Control had kept enemies cautious, employees obedient, and truth incomplete. Mara had risked everything because the truth mattered even when it turned against her. If he kept his records sealed now, every promise of protection would become another form of ownership. He slid the manifests toward his counsel, released the relevant routes to the independent inquiry. Caleb stared at him. "Once they leave this room, we cannot call them back. That is why it matters." Mara looked up. "You could lose contracts." "Yes." "Political protection." "Yes." "And if the records show your company ignored warnings?" Adrian's expression did not soften. "Then my company answers for that." The manifests revealed repeated HarborMed shipments routed through a subcontractor already under internal Vescary review for counterfeit imports. Adrian had been preparing to terminate the route and turn the records over to federal investigators. If he had died before disclosure, Pike's network would have kept its access and blamed the poison components on a manufacturing defect. The motive was no longer abstract. Pike had not targeted a patient. He had targeted the man who could expose the supply chain. Dr. Park's phone vibrated against the table. She read the message and went still. "HarborMed's recall team has entered the hospital." Mara looked toward the sealed evidence room beyond the glass corridor. Her statement was filed. Adrian's manifests were open. The case had finally become strong enough to destroy Pike's cover, provided the evidence was still there when the review began. The recall team arrived in white Harbor Med coats with rolling cases, sealed bins, and paperwork stamped emergency patient safety action. Graham Pike walked at their center as if the hospital corridor belonged to him. "Every unit from the affected lot leaves with us now," he said. "Further delay creates unacceptable risk." Mara stood beside her attorney outside the quarantine room. Through the glass, the used 4-component and the unopened matching unit remained in separate evidence containers, each marked with its own chain number. Dr. Park held the hospital's freeze order. Caleb and 2 vestry guards waited farther down the corridor, hands visible, their dark suits turning the bright medical floor into something colder. Adrian sat in his wheelchair near the review room doors. He looked weak enough to remind everyone why they were there and dangerous enough that no one forgot who he was. Pike handed a packet to the hospital administrator. "Our corporate recall authority supersedes local inventory procedure." Mara's attorney passed her the witness copy she was authorized to review. The first page sounded official. The second listed the affected lot. The third named Harbor Med as both collector and final custodian. Mara read that line again. "Where does the independent evidence custodian sign?" Pike looked at her as though a chair had spoken. "This is a recall, Ms. Sullivan, not your former factory floor. The hospital freeze order requires independent custody for every item connected to the poisoning inquiry." She held up the page. "Your form transfers the evidence directly to the company under investigation. It transfers defective product to the manufacturer responsible for patient safety. Harbor Med is the distributor, not the independent custodian. And this form does not distinguish the component removed from Adrian's active 4 from the sealed unit taken from inventory." Pike's expression hardened. "You are not qualified to interpret compliance documents." Mara felt every old insult pressing at her back. Difficult, oversized, uncooperative, only the maid. But fear no longer sounded like a command. "I'm qualified to read what the document says." He turned to the administrator. "Remove her from the corridor." Caleb moved 1 step forward. Adrian lifted 2 fingers. Caleb stopped. "No one touches her," Adrian said quietly. "No one touches the evidence, either." Pike faced him. "Your private security has no authority here." "Correct," Adrian replied. "That is why they are staying outside the chain." He looked at Caleb. "Hold the corridor. No threats. No weapons displayed. No one enters the quarantine room without DR." Park's authorization. Rage flashed through Caleb's face, then disappeared beneath discipline. "Understood." Mara turned to Dr. Park. "If those containers leave under this paperwork, the independent chain ends here." Dr. Park studied the form, then the freeze order in her hand. For 1 long second, the entire corridor waited on whether a physician would listen to the maid who had already been right once. "The lot remains under clinical quarantine," Dr. Park said. "Mercy Harbor will not release either item until independent authentication is complete." Pike stepped closer. "You are obstructing an emergency recall based on the opinion of a terminated household employee." Dr. Park's voice sharpened. "I am acting on confirmed toxic contamination, 2 separately preserved components, and an active criminal inquiry. 12 physicians reviewed Mr. Vescary before Ms. Sullivan identified the source we failed to question. I will not repeat that mistake because her job title makes you comfortable." The room behind the glass went silent. Pike's lawyers began speaking at once. The administrator called the independent investigators. Harbor Med's bins remained empty. Hours later, the results were read in the formal review room. The component removed from Adrian's 4 contained the toxic contaminant documented in the preliminary test. The unopened unit from the matching lot carried the same signature beneath intact packaging. The elevator log, visitor record, household roster, sworn statement, and Vescary manifest placed an unauthorized Harbor Med credential inside the only substitution window and tied Pike's route to the counterfeit supply channel Adrian had been preparing to expose. No single record proved everything. Together, they left nowhere for the defect's story to hide. Pike stood at the end of the table, his silver pin catching the white light. This interpretation will be challenged. Then challenge it in the proper forum, Adrian said. His voice was calm, but Mara saw what that calm cost him. He could have ordered Pike dragged into a locked room. He could have answered poison with blood. Instead, he slid the remaining port records toward the independent investigators. You have everything relevant. Pike's eyes moved to Mara. The contempt was gone. What remained was fear. Mara did not smile. She looked through the glass at the 2 evidence containers still sealed under independent custody. She had found the poison. She had preserved the line. She had refused the lie, the settlement, and the recall that came to erase what she knew. Around her, the doctors who had once seen only a maid now watched the woman whose decision had saved their patient and exposed the system they had trusted. For the first time, no one asked Mara to step aside. 2 weeks later, Mercy Harbor's glass atrium was filled with people who once would have passed Mara Sullivan without learning her name. Physicians stood beneath the white banners of the hospital. Administrators lined the polished floor. Reporters waited behind a low barrier, their cameras aimed toward the small stage where Dr. Helen Park held a prepared statement. Mara stood to one side in a navy suit that belonged to her, not borrowed from Naomi and not issued by the Vescary household. A new apartment key rested in her handbag. The lease carried only her name. Adrian had offered to pay for a year. Mara had accepted 3 hotel nights, then declined everything else. She wanted a door no one powerful could close around her. Adrian stood near the back of the crowd, recovered enough to leave the wheelchair, but still thinner than before, one hand resting on a black cane. He had chosen the shadows instead of the stage. That mattered. Dr. Park stepped to the microphone. Mercy Harbor has completed its initial patient safety review. 12 physicians evaluated Mr. Adrian Vescary before Mara Sullivan identified the abnormality in the 4-component that exposed him to a toxic contaminant. No softened language. No accidental observación. The words moved through the atrium with the force of a verdict. Several members of the medical team lowered their eyes. Others looked directly at Mara. Ms. Sullivan recognized a packaging and visual deviation outside the assumptions guiding our clinical review, Dr. Park continued. Her warning stopped further exposure. Her documentation preserved the lot number. Her testimony protected the evidence when institutional and corporate pressure threatened its custody. The audience turned toward Mara. For years, being watched had meant being judged. Her body, her uniform, the space she occupied. Now, they were looking because the truth had her name attached to it. The contaminated lot had been removed from circulation. HarborMed's contract had been suspended. Graham Pike and the counterfeit route were under formal investigation. Adrian's condition continued to improve. Those were the practical endings. Mercy Harbor had been forced to create something larger. A blue curtain fell from a wall behind Dr. Park, revealing a brushed steel plaque. The Sullivan Observation Protocol. Any staff member may stop a process for safety. Every concern must be documented and clinically reviewed, regardless of title. Mara's breath caught. Dr. Park faced her. Mercy Harbor has also established an independent quality and safety office. We have asked MS. Sullivan to serve as its founding safety coordinator, with formal authority to review process deviations across staff categories. Applause rose beneath the high glass ceiling. It was not a ring, not a mansion, not a reward hidden inside a private room. It was authority, salary, responsibility, and a rule that would remain after the cameras left. Mara stepped onto the stage and accepted the Navy badge. Safety Coordinator, Mara Sullivan. I'll take the position, she said into the microphone. On one condition. The hospital president stiffened. Mara looked at the line beneath her name on the plaque. The protocol applies to housekeeping, transport, food service, security, nurses, physicians, and executives. No exceptions for rank. Dr. Park's mouth curved slightly. Agreed. The applause returned, louder. When the ceremony ended, Mara descended the steps. Adrian waited beyond the crowd. He did not approach until she reached him. Your employment with my household is formally closed, he said. No contract, no debt, no protection you do not request. Good. His gaze lowered briefly to her badge, then returned to her face. May I take you to dinner? Mara let the silence sit between them. Months ago, his attention would have felt like another order. Now, he stood behind her public moment, asking a question she was free to answer. He extended his hand, then waited. Mara looked back at the plaque bearing her name, at the doctors who could no longer pretend they had not heard her, and at the glass doors opening toward the city. Then she placed her hand in Adrian's. Dinner, she said, not ownership. Never. Mara stepped through the doors first. Adrian followed,